I started my office only about 12, 13 years ago. But I see it as kind of something very interesting, very exciting, a certain kind of path which has its own unpredictability to it. You have to work with reality, and reality is not something you can just control. That's what makes it real, that it's not a controllable entity, and you have to work with the uncontrollable and to get a hold of it and do something good with it. You know, if you just market yourself as a brand, then you have a kind of formula. I don't believe in it. I think you have to produce architecture which has values that bring the different buildings into a specific context. And I think, of course, you cannot get away from, and you don't want to get away from your own hand and your own eye, but you have to do something that transcends just the limitations of each program. Names are important. People have all sorts of labels, but it's not about the labels. It's what's behind them that's important. Design is not just something to take for granted. It shapes lives and shapes actually the society and the world we want to live in. It's very easy. You have to be breathless, kind of lose your breath when you see it, and kind of have a feeling which is not just intellectual but truly emotional to respond to a design. It's just like seeing the ocean for the first time. Well, it's a civic design approach, an approach to a building not just by itself, but how is it connected to the bigger issues, to memory, to the history, and to the future of a city. It's not just about the immediate program, but the wider consequence of a building in a great city like Berlin. And once you're a Berlin, you have been to Berlin, you cannot be out of Berlin. You will always be a Berliner in that sense. And of course, it's a very the city has a very deep connection to my life, and I'm glad for it. In an ironic and strange way, there is a connection, and has always been historically, between Berlin and New York. But of course, you know, New York is now my home. We are moving ahead in a very intensive schedule. The plans that we have unveiled with the LMBC and with the Port Authority and with all the stakeholders show that the plan has become stronger. It's the same plan, but strengthened by reality and by incorporating into it all the parameters that need to be incorporated. And so it's moving ahead. It's a very complex project, but we're making tremendous progress because we want to start construction very, very soon. In about 4 years, you're going to see a lot. You'll see new streets. You'll see the Wedge of Light Plaza. You see the Park of Heroes. You see Granite Street, which you haven't seen before, Fulton Street going east to us. You see the memorial developed with the slurry wall, with the foundations. You see the museum buildings. You see the Performing Arts Center. You'll see the Great Station, the Path Station, and you'll see the Freedom Tower. 10 million square feet of office space. Almost 1 million square feet of cultural activities, Performing Arts Center and museums, the memorial itself, which there's a competition for now, the great set of towers that spiral to the highest tower in the world. That's a very big project. And of course the infrastructure underground and all the trains and transportation terminal. In this case, that is the situation, that I'm collaborating with Mr. Childs on that tower. But of course, I'm in charge of the project. I'm in charge of not just the master planning, but of the design guidelines for every building. And additionally, I do hope that I will also build some buildings there myself. He's an architect that I'm going to be collaborating with, who is Mr. Silverstein's architect, the investor's architect, works for SOM, a very large firm of builders of high-rise buildings. And we will be collaborating very closely on the tower that will be there. What the most decisive is to stay true to the substance of what happened in 9/11, to think of what happened, what that meant, what it meant to the people who perished that day. What does it mean for New York today and for the future of a democratic city, for America, for the free world. Well, the Spiral was a very important competition for me because it will be the first really freestanding contemporary museum building in London, not behind old walls like the great museums of the Tate or the British Library, but a building that is connected to the Victorian history of the Victoria and Albert Museum. And it's a bold new building in every sense, structurally, aesthetically, socially, functionally, and architectural, of course. Well, it was a very controversial building when it was first proposed, but seemingly so was the Jewish Museum when it was first proposed. And yet, of course, that's what gives a life to a building, and the public debate and the discourse has meant that the building has been thematized, and people know very well what is at stake. You know, is London only going to be something from the 19th century, or is it going to be a city of also of the 21st century? Well, every project you do is part of some sort of a path, and you have to bring the experience that you have, and it is a singular experience.